Welcome to SparkMap. SparkMap is built and run by a team of data analysts, programmers, and GIS technicians who collect, clean, and aggregate data from reliable secondary sources. We make these data available through two powerful tools, the Community Needs Assessment and MapRoom. Need to build a community needs assessment or gather more data about your community? Use SparkMap to spend less time researching and more time implementing positive change. The following video will provide examples of how you can use SparkMap. To keep up with SparkMap, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and social media accounts.
So welcome today. Like I said, my name is Jamie Klein-Sorge. I'm part of the Center for Applied Research and Engagement Systems. We're the folks behind SparkMap. So if you didn't know that, we are part of the University of Missouri. We launched SparkMap, I guess it's been 5 or 6 years ago now, and have been working to continue to grow the types of data and the types of tools that we make available to our users. So we're tapping into water layers today on SparkMap, and so I just wanted to kind of do a little bit of a level set of why are we even focusing on water to get started, and then we'll talk about some layers that we have available. So I just did a very quick news search. Believe it or not, you can just type in water news and you're going to get a lot of results. And so that's really the biggest reason that we decided to focus on water for this webinar today, is because we are hearing lots of different industries, lots of different communities, lots of different people that have interests in water, talking about water issues that they're dealing with, or talking about potential water issues that might be coming down the pipe. So we're talking about water today because we're hearing things about contamination. You'll see there on the right, I have a little screenshot from Iowa. They are, kind of notorious for not having a great water quality due to agriculture. So they just signed a bill into law trying to address that. We talk about water access. So that's that kind of other little screenshot that I have there around water crises, right? We know that there are problems in the western part of the country related to water availability in the Colorado River and usage and all of those types of things. Here in the Midwest, where we're located, people are talking about data centers and water usage and water contamination related to that, to building and operating those data centers. PFAS, or forever chemicals, have been a topic of conversation, I think, all across the country. We've had some spills and those types of things that have come up. Recreation and tourism. It's high season summer here in the Midwest, but we are seeing lots of things like algae blooms and other types of water related problems. We also know that there's, water issues related to agriculture and animal health, and then coming back around to climate change. So really, how are we addressing, the lack of water or too much water, which is kind of where we're at here in Missouri right now. So you can see here, these are just a couple of other types of news stories that came up in my search here. So you can see stuff around water usage, water emergencies, right? Thinking about flooding and that climate piece. And then I thought this other one, the statistical agencies face third office closure in recent weeks, was just too good to be true for this webinar today, because it's literally talking about people from the census and the Bureau of Labor Statistics and how they have been kicked out of their federal building several times over the last couple of weeks due to water quality issues, right? So it's sort of happening all across the nation. It's happening at, in different locations, at home, at work, in your fields. So we thought we would let you all know about what we have available in terms of water. So as you may encounter some conversations, problems, opportunities in your work, you know where you can find good information. So I'm not going to be able to demo all of our water layers today. So I kind of wanted to give you just a nice overview of some of the layers that we do have on SparkMap before I get into the map room. So you'll see here that we have some base water layers. So things like our water layer, which is on by default in our map room, and that shows us oceans and rivers and those kinds of things. We have watersheds and waterways. We have I'm messing that word up. Hydrological soil groups, right? Aquifers, wetlands inventory, drainage class. So those are all really sort of like those base layers, right? When we're thinking about water on the ground, water under the ground, our aquifers, we've got a lot of data related to that. So those are some of the base layers that we have available. In terms of some climate related water data that we have, obviously I mentioned floods. So we have things like floodplains and flood hazards, flood declarations. We do have a drought layer, which comes to us from the drought monitor at the University of Nebraska. And that is one of our layers that's updated daily. And so that's real-time data that we're getting there. We also have lots of precipitation data, so change and averages over time, 100-year averages, and then changes in things like river flooding, snowfall. And then we do have some data related to storms, hurricanes, severe thunderstorms, those types of things that can be helpful. Outside of base layers and climate layers, we also have water usage or water infrastructure layers, excuse me. So we're thinking about, what are the physical elements that we've got out there? So things like domestic wells, water treatment plants, bottling facilities. And then we get into some of those more structural items like dams, ports, embankments, levees. So all of that type of stuff is also available in the map room for you. We have lots of data also related to water usage and water quality. So things like irrigation use, drinking water violations, drinking water safety, impaired streams, pesticide use, which I'll show some of that today, surface water places, facilities that discharge, pollutant releases. So that should give you a pretty good overview, right, of the kinds of data that we have. Those base layers, some climate layers, some water usage and quality, and then the infrastructure piece. So some of the reasons that you might be using water data in your work these are just a few, right? But if you're working in public health, things like dental health, disease prevention, and healthy lifestyles are paramount, right, to the work that folks are doing in public health. And so, there's some things that are, easily treatable diseases that come to us from water. But then there are those harder to treat cancers and other types of, ailments that do and are affected by the water quality that we all have access to. We also think a lot about our environmental health, right? When it comes to agriculture and soil health, water availability. Do we have enough water to grow the crops that we need, right? Water quality, and then usage and conservation. And then grant applications. We know a lot of folks that use SparkMap are writing grants. And so I'm going to use that as one of my examples here once we dive in around, how can you use some of these data to reply to some funding opportunities that are out there right now. So here we are in SparkMap. Like I said, I'm going to spend a big chunk of time in the map room, but I'll also show you some of the indicators that we have available in our needs assessment as well. So to get started under that Create tab, I'm just going to drop right into the map room here, and I get our nice search option. So one of the things that I wanted to mention, as I said, was kind of that grant seeking or that funding seeking piece of it. So recently there were quite a few EPA grants that were talked about, right? And released. And so one of those that I wanted to focus on for today is this Emerging Contaminants in Small and Disadvantaged Communities grant. So I think this is a good example of the types of grants that are available from EPA. And so you'll see here, it gives you some information about, eligible applicants and eligible projects. And that's really the piece that I was most interested in is, what's going to be eligible? What are they looking for? What kind of data would I need in order to respond to a grant application like this? So, one of the things it talks about is addressing emerging contaminants in drinking water, looking at disadvantaged or small communities, looking at households, right? Also looking at water quality and testing opportunities. And then also just looking at those, what are the contaminants, right, in and around where you might be working or where you might be living. And so, oh, do I have the right? Sorry about that. So one of the things I wanted to start with was just some foundational information. So one of that first questions that they ask is really around per household usage and per household response. And so one of the things that we can look at if we type in total households here, we can get some great data from the American Community Survey, just kind of as our base, right? So here we can see it at county level, how many households there are in each county. I'll zoom in here to Oklahoma a little bit, and we're able to kind of see some of that. Just as a reminder, if you click on the map, you can get a pop-up and it'll show you some of that metadata. So we can see here very easily if we were, writing a grant for Canadian County in Oklahoma, we'll see here we have about 58,000 total households in this area. So that's some really good baseline information that we have there. If you're doing this for a state, we also have this information at the state level. It's not nearly as exciting, but if you are looking for that state level data, that is something that is available to you there. So let me go back to county here and move that layer. And so total households was something that we would need to respond to that grant application. One other things that I wanted to put on here was they talked about disadvantaged communities, right? So we do have a tool available in our tools bar over here that's called the Vulnerable Populations Footprint. And I think that this would be a great tool to be able to look at where are maybe some of our more vulnerable communities alongside some of that total household data. So do we have enough people to make a difference in a specific area? Again, here I'll zoom in. I wanted to look at actually this Shreveport area in Louisiana. And so we can start to see here, right, that we've got some areas where we have high rates of poverty and populations with less than a high school diploma. So that would be considered something that would be vulnerable or potentially disadvantaged alongside that household data. So continuing on sort of our water journey and responding to this grant application, one of the other things that it talked about was, right, are there existing water quality problems? And so we can start to suss that out here. We can look at things like drinking water violations. And one of the things that I noticed as I was putting this presentation together is we have lots of different sources for drinking water violations. So a couple of different layers that come from the EPA and then a couple of layers that come from county health rankings. Really depends on, again, what you're using these data for, which ones you want to select. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick this top one here from the EPA. And we can start to see, I'm going to turn off my total households, that we do have some overlap, right, in terms of some of our vulnerable populations and some of these areas that we're seeing have lots of drinking water violations, right? So this could be an area that would be a good candidate for a grant like this one, right? Where we've got some vulnerable folks in a disadvantaged community, and we already know that there's an existing drinking water, there could be some existing drinking water problems, right? So we can see that, and I was just toggling on basically both of my layers to be able to kind of inspect and find where some of those overlaps are. We also have other drinking water violations data as well. One of the other ones that we have is by population. Let me see if I can find that one here. Might be this one. Yes. And I like this one also because it's showing us the percent of population affected by drinking water violations. And so we can see again that area around Shreveport is in the over 25 to 5 to 25%. So a big chunk, right, of the population is being affected here by some of these drinking water violations. So again, just more validation and reason for potentially applying for some funding or getting some funding in this area. In addition to the drinking water violations, I'm going to go back to my add data here and just type in water. And typing in water will get you a nice, big, broad grouping, about 69 results that we have. It doesn't include all of the things that I had shown on my slide, but it does include quite a few of them here. And so one of the things that you can also look at are things like this grant helps with water testing. So is there good water testing going on? Do people have access to that? So without looking at the public water usage supply, we can also look at domestic wells, which I thought was also an interesting layer that we can look at by census tract as well. So we can start to see that, well, yeah, a lot of those places here in like central Shreveport, right, they're obviously using the public water supply. So we want to make sure that we're doing a lot of testing on the public water supply side. But are there opportunities to also do some of that testing or education and outreach for folks that have wells? And it does look like in this area that we do have quite a few people in the more rural parts of this county that are using wells for drinking water. And so you can see that's represented in some of these darker green areas here, whereas we see that lower well usage in the more central city part of it, which makes a lot of sense, right? But it gives us a better idea of, where people are located, where those wells are located, right? And maybe where we would want to do some of our outreach in terms of testing. In addition to this, it asks about emerging contaminants, right? That's really what this grant is all about. And so there are lots of state level data portals where you can look at the public water supply and different contaminants. But you can also use the map room to see some more macro level contaminant usage. And so a couple of those include things like pesticides. So I'm going to type that in. You'll see here that we have just kind of this overall estimated pesticide use layer. And then it does get into some of the individual types of pesticides that are used. So depending on maybe what you want to focus on, you might want to use the non-general one and a more specific one. But what we can see here is that we've got this area where we have lots of pesticide use here in this blue area, right? And that does in fact overlap with a lot of our wells. So good reason for doing some testing among domestic wells. And then it also does overlap, right, with some of those drinking water violation areas as well. So the pesticide use is one contaminant that you can look at. We also have pollutant releases. And so we've got some water pollutant releases that you can look at. This is showing us much of the same types of thing that we've got quite a bit of pollutant release that happens in this Shreveport area. You can look at this at pounds per square mile or total pounds, but that could be another potential cause of some contaminants or some drinking water violations. Some other ones that we have are we have some like Superfund data. So we've got proximity and Superfund sites, hazardous waste sites, brownfield sites. All of these are great to know about, right? They're not necessarily leaking or leaching, right? But they could be, and they could be contributing, right, to some of those water quality violations that we're seeing in this area as well. I don't think that it's, always just I do think sometimes it's more than a coincidence, I guess is what I'm trying to say here, where we see some of that overlap between, well, the locations, right? The concentration of some of these sites, and then also the concentration of where we're seeing our drinking water violations as well. So in addition to that, we have also a non-compliance layer, and I thought that one might be a good one for you guys to know about too. This comes to us from the EJ screen data from the EPA, and I'm going to turn off some of my other layers because my map's starting to get a little crazy here. But you can see here that this gives us some non-compliance scores by census tract as well. So again, we're getting a nice view granularly below the county level at sort of what those non-compliance scores look like. And I think those would also make good validation for applying for and receiving funding in this kind of way as well. A couple of other layers that I just want to highlight before I turn it over to Jordan. We have some other water layers that I think are pretty cool. So we have these water bottling facilities, and I don't know why I find this so fascinating, but I do. You can see places where bottled water, brewery, distilleries, people make ice, soft drinks, and wineries. So these are, places that are using large quantities of water. I would want to make sure that bottled water is coming from a place that is not, also experiencing a lot of water violations. So that could be part of a narrative as well. And then we have some of those more base layers that I did want to point out because those are important too to really understanding, right, the larger ecosystem around water. So we have like watersheds. I think I have to just watershed with no S here. And so you can start to see what that looks like. Let me turn off some of my other layers here and zoom out a little bit. So you can see what those watersheds look like. We've got lots of those data available. And then we have stuff around flooding. So that's one thing that I just wanted to point out too. Maybe if I flood, I think is the first one that I want here. We have some flood hazard zones from FEMA. That's something else that I think other folks have been dealing with. I know here in Missouri, we've gotten just copious amounts of rain over the last couple of weeks. There's been lots of basements that are flooded, but there's also been lots of roads that are flooded. There have been some water rescues recently. And so really making sure that you know where those areas are. If you're doing anything around emergency management and risk assessment for your community, using these types of flood layers can really help you identify those and make sure then, your first responders know what they're getting into and where to look or, where to spend some extra time. And so just wanted to mention that those are all available to you as well. So I've spent most of my time here in the map room, but I did want to mention that within our needs assessment, we do also have some water data available to you. So I'm just going to pick a random county here. And in the data indicators section, you can type in water and it'll give you some of those layers that we just looked at and some other additional data. So we have things like that public water usage, the drinking water safety, the irrigation water withdrawal, and these are all available to you here. A lot of these other ones are air related, but it's air and water quality, so they show up in the results here. But then there are some of those other social determinants kind of data. So if you did want to look at some diseases or cancers, those types of things alongside these data, they're also available in the report. So if you're not familiar with our report, you basically get a data table, a dial where available, and then we do have some inset maps. And if we have data that show trends over time, we will show that as well. So lots of good information there. Really a lot of foundational information that can help you get started on something like a grant application or get started if you're trying to address issues that are emerging in your community, whether that be data centers or floods or whatever it may be. SparkMap is going to be a good place to start to get good information on those issues and opportunities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan, and she is going to share some of our new functionality in the map room that we are all very excited about.
Yes, thanks, Jamie. So I'm going to share my screen here, and like Jamie said, I'm going to take us back to the map room in SparkMap. And as you can see here, I have pulled up two of the layers that we were looking at earlier. We have our drinking water violations and our water treatment plants here. Um, and so something you could do if you were going to pull out this map for a grant application, for a presentation, and you needed a nice visual. And let's say, to me at least, and I admittedly probably need to get my eyes checked, the contrast on this is a little low. Right? I would like something that is has a bit more of a stark contrast, especially if I'm going to print this out, right? That light blue and that gray is not fantastic for that. And so with any map layer, what you're going to do to change your colors is you are going to click this little paint bucket symbol over here on the legend. And then a little customization panel is going to open up for you. And so from here, you can select an entirely new color palette if you like. And so let's say I wanted to do a nice all blue palette. I can do that here. I could also change the width and color of the outlines between my different polygons. And so I'm going to go ahead and click the update button just so we can see what these changes look like and see if we like them. So, okay. Our changes have processed, and as we can see, we have our nice dark blue for our over 15s. And then I don't like that these two blues are so close together, and I wish this were more of a gray so I could tell that it were a 0, right? Um, and so I can then go in and individually customize items from my color palette. I can also just pick a new palette if I wanted. But so, for example, for this one, if I want to make a bit more clear that this is where there are no health violations, I'll make it gray. And just for fun, we'll make this one pink so it's really different. And we'll click update. And now our map has updated. And so we can also do this for that other layer type where we have points on the map for our treatment facilities. So I'm going to go back either to my legend, or I could go to this tool list. And from the list, I can go to customize map symbols. But for here, I'll go back to our legend. I'll click my paint bucket again. And this time I have to select individually, symbol by symbol. So for our major treatment plants, I can go in and select the color and shape that I want to use for those. And then same as I did before, I'll click this update button down at the bottom left, and my update should process. I can also edit the size because, these points are a little small. And so I can slide this way up, set my style, and update. And now those larger treatment facilities or major treatment facilities are bigger on my map than my other ones. And so I could, continue by making the minor ones even smaller to give a better contrast, or doing whatever I like there. One other thing I can do here, so going back to the drinking water violations, for anyone unfamiliar with the SparkMap map room, any of the map layers that you add to your map, you can add labels to the map by making sure you're zoomed in and then clicking this label button here. And so as we can see, now on our map, we have a number hovering over the polygon telling us that there has been one drinking water violation in this area, but 22 in this one, right? And so if I want to change these labels for a visualization presentation, I do the same thing I did before. I click my paint bucket, and now that I've turned my labels on, I have a new tab here. So I'm going to click this label font tab, and here you can go in and change your label font. So if I want Times New Roman labels, I can click that and do that. I can change my font color. So if I want it to be bright red, I can do that. And if I want to make them a whole lot larger, I can do that as well. And so then I'm going to click that update button, same as before. And they didn't get much larger, did they? Let's try that again. Oh yeah. So maybe that red is not the color you would want, but know that you can go back and customize all you want. And so I'm going to put this back to a nice black, update again, and that's a lot better. And then for anybody who is not familiar with the map room, know that you can export your map images by clicking this export button over here on the bottom left. So I can export a map only, or I can export my map with an image. And we have a lot of nice export options here for you to choose from. You also have the option, so if you were doing any sort of online application or sending a map to someone in a, Teams chat or an email, you can click this share button in the bottom left menu and then click the little copy icon over here beside the short link, and it is going to create a nice short link to your map. This is going to allow anybody to open up your map and view it exactly as you're seeing it, and then go in and interact with it themselves. And so those are our big new features in the map room, though we're always adding fun new things, including new data that you can find over here on your add data page, where when search results are not pulled up, you are going to have information on our most recently added data and most popular data.
Thank you for learning more about SparkMap. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out via the contact form on sparkmap.org. Don't forget to subscribe.